Hey, leave him alone, that's enough.
Relax, it's just a joke.
A joke? That's my father. I could buy this whole restaurant. Apologize.
Whoa, we had no idea.
Stop it. Leave him alone.
Mind your business, waitress. He's a customer. Show some respect.
What is going on here?
Who are you?
His daughter. And you're done here.
Kind waitress defends an old man being mocked, unaware his daughter is a billionaire. The rain had just stopped over the city when the old man pushed open the glass doors of Le Voisin, the most expensive restaurant in the financial district. He didn't belong there. Everyone in the room seemed to know it the moment he stepped inside. His coat was patched at the elbows, grey with age and weather. His shoes were split at the seams. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from years. Years of work, of loss, of carrying more than his body could hold. His name was Elmore Whitfield. He was 78 years old. And today, of all days, he had come to eat alone. "Table for one," he said quietly to the host stand, his voice rough like gravel dragged over stone. The young host, a sharp-jawed man in a slim black suit, looked him over from head to toe. His eyes lingered on the torn sleeve, the scuffed shoes, the frayed collar. "Sir, I think you might have the wrong address," the host said, his tone syrupy with false politeness. "This is a reservation-only establishment." "I called ahead," Elmore said. "Table for Whitfield, 6 o'clock. The host's smile faltered. He checked the screen, and sure enough, there it was, a reservation, paid in advance. In full. He had no choice. "Right this way," the host muttered, clearly displeased, and led Elmore toward the back of the restaurant, as far from the windows and from the other guests as possible. Elmore didn't complain. He never did. He simply nodded, thanked the young man, and lowered himself slowly into the chair. On the table sat a small, unlit candle, and beside it, tucked into his coat pocket, a photograph worn soft at the edges from years of handling. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Today would have been her 65th birthday. His wife, Corinne, had been gone 3 years now. But every year on this day, Elmore came somewhere nice, somewhere she would have loved, and ordered her favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary, a glass of red wine he never finished. It was the only extravagance he allowed himself all year. He didn't know that tonight, that quiet ritual would be shattered. 20 feet away, a table of 5 men in tailored suits were 3 rounds of scotch into a celebration. Investment bankers, all of them, celebrating a deal that had closed that afternoon. A deal worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Their laughter was loud, careless. The kind of laughter that fills a room because the people making it have never once worried about being unwelcome in it. "Boys, to another record quarter," said Desmond Cole, the loudest of them, raising his glass. He was broad-shouldered, silver cufflinks catching the light, a Rolex peeking from beneath his sleeve. The others clinked glasses, laughed, ordered more. It was Desmond who noticed Elmore first. "What in the world is that?" he said, not even bothering to lower his voice, nodding toward the old man seated alone near the back. His friend Whit Hargrove turned to look, then chuckled. "I think the health inspector let someone in by mistake." More laughter, ugly, careless laughter. Elmore heard every word. He always did. His hearing, unlike his hands, had never betrayed him. But he had learned, over many years, that some battles weren't worth fighting. He simply looked down at the menu and pretended not to hear. "Seriously, though," said a third man, Brantley Voss, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. "How does someone like that even get a table here? Did he wander in from the subway grate? Maybe he's here for the free bread," Desmond said, and the table erupted again. At the host stand, a young woman had just clocked in for her shift. Her name was Junie Alvarez, 26 years old, hair pulled back in a low knot, an apron tied twice around her narrow waist. She had worked at Le Voisin for 8 months, ever since her mother's medical bills had made every extra shift a necessity rather than a choice. She noticed the old man immediately, not because of his clothes, but because of his eyes. There was something in them, a quiet dignity that didn't ask to be seen, but earned it anyway. She noticed, too, the table of loud men and the direction their laughter kept drifting. "Table 6 needs a server," her manager, Priscilla Danes, said flatly, pointing toward Elmore's table. "You've got it." Junie walked over with a warm smile already in place, not performed, but real. It was simply how she carried herself. "Good evening, sir," she said. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Elmore looked up, surprised by the warmth in her voice. Most people who looked at him lately did so with pity, or worse, contempt. Not her. "Water is fine," he said. "And do you still make the roast chicken with rosemary?" "We do. It's one of my favorites on the menu," Junie smiled. "Great choice." "My wife's favorite," Elmore said softly, almost to himself. Something in his voice made Junie pause. She didn't ask. She simply nodded gently, the way you nod at someone carrying something heavy, and wrote down the order. "I'll bring that water right out," she said. As she turned to leave, she caught Desmond's table watching her. "Sweetheart," Desmond called out, waving her over with 2 fingers, as if summoning a dog. "Sweetheart, come here." Junie approached, her professional smile steady. "How can I help you, sir?" Desmond gestured toward Elmore with his chin, lowering his voice just enough to seem discreet, though it carried perfectly well. "Is management aware there's a homeless man eating in here? Some of us are trying to enjoy a meal." Junie felt her stomach tighten. "He's a paying guest, sir, just like yourself." "A paying guest," Whit repeated, laughing into his glass. "Right. With what? Spare change?" "Maybe he found a 20 on the sidewalk," Brantley added, and the table roared. Junie's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Is there something else I can get for your table?" "Yeah," Desmond said, leaning back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself now. "Get us another round, and maybe ask your manager why the dress code doesn't apply to certain people." Junie didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Not from fear, but from the effort of holding her tongue. She glanced back once at Elmore's table. He was staring down at his water glass, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to take up less space in the world than he already did. Her heart ached for him. The night went on, and it didn't get better. Every few minutes another comment drifted from Desmond's table, a joke about smell, a joke about begging, a joke about how some people just don't know when they're not wanted. Elmore said nothing. He ate slowly, methodically, his eyes occasionally drifting to the empty chair across from him, where Corinne should have been sitting, laughing at something silly he'd said, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze his. Junie brought his food personally, refusing to let anyone else touch that table. She refilled his water without being asked. She lingered just slightly each time she passed, enough for him to know someone in that room saw him as a person, not a punchline. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked gently, setting down the plate. Elmore looked up at her, and for the first time that evening something like warmth crossed his weathered face. "It's perfect," he said. "Thank you. Truly." "Of course," Junie said. "Enjoy your dinner." She didn't know, not yet, who he really was. She only knew that he was being treated cruelly, and that it was wrong, and that somebody in this restaurant needed to remember he was human. She had no idea that her small kindness, pouring water, speaking gently, treating an old man like he mattered, was about to collide with the loud, careless cruelty of 5 wealthy men in a way that would change every single life at that table. Because Desmond Cole wasn't finished yet. He stood up from his chair, swaying slightly from the scotch, and began walking toward Elmore's table with a smirk stretched across his face. "Hey, old-timer," he called out, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Why don't you do us all a favor and—" He never finished the sentence. Junie stepped directly into his path, planting herself between Desmond and the old man's table, her chin lifted, her voice steady and clear. "That's enough," she said. The entire restaurant went silent. "That's enough." The words hung in the air of Le Voisin like smoke that wouldn't clear. Desmond Cole blinked down at the young waitress standing between him and the old man's table, as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Nobody spoke to Desmond Cole that way. Not clients, not colleagues, certainly not a waitress in a black apron. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dropping into something colder. "I said that's enough," Junie repeated, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "He's a guest here, same as you. He hasn't bothered anyone. I'd ask you to return to your table." A few nearby diners had gone quiet, watching now, their forks paused mid-air. In the back, Elmore sat frozen, his eyes wide, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Desmond let out a short, disbelieving laugh and turned to look at his friends as if inviting them to share the joke. "Is this a joke, sweetheart? Do you know who I am?" "I know you're a customer," Junie said, "one who's had enough to drink and one who's making an elderly man feel unwelcome in a public restaurant. I won't stand here and let that happen." "You won't let it happen," Desmond repeated, stepping closer, close enough that Junie could smell the scotch on his breath. "You're a waitress. You bring food. You refill water. You don't get an opinion." "I get to be a decent human being," Junie shot back. "Something you might try sometime." A ripple of quiet laughter moved through a nearby table, not from Desmond's group, but from strangers who had clearly been enjoying the show for the wrong reasons and were now enjoying it for a very different one. Desmond's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being laughed at. He was used to being the one laughing. "You know what?" he said, his voice rising. "Let me speak to your manager. Right now." "Gladly," Junie said, though something in her stomach twisted. She knew exactly how this would go. Priscilla Danes arrived within 90 seconds, her heels clicking sharp and fast against the marble floor, her face already arranged into the practiced expression of someone about to apologize for something she hadn't seen. "Mr. Cole, I am so sorry for any trouble," Priscilla said, before even asking what had happened. "What can I do to make this right?" "Your waitress," Desmond said, jabbing a finger toward Junie, "just humiliated me in front of my associates. I want her removed from this section immediately. Frankly, I want to know why a man dressed like that," he flicked his hand dismissively toward Elmore, "was even seated in the same room as paying clients." Priscilla's eyes flicked toward Junie, and Junie saw the decision being made before it was spoken aloud. She had seen it before. In this restaurant, wealth outranked truth every single time. "Junie," Priscilla said, her voice tight, "apologize to Mr. Cole." Junie felt something inside her go very still and very clear. "I won't do that," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything wrong. He and his friends have been mocking an elderly man for the better part of an hour. I asked them to stop. That's not something I'm going to apologize for." Priscilla's face went pale with panic. "Junie?" "It's all right," Junie said before her manager could dig herself in deeper. "I understand what you're asking me to do. I'm just telling you I won't do it." Desmond smiled, a slow, satisfied smile, the smile of a man used to winning. "Well then, I suppose the question becomes whether she keeps her job tonight." The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now. Forks down. Conversations paused. Every eye in the room fixed on the small, terrible drama unfolding by table 6. Priscilla turned to Junie, her voice a desperate whisper. "Junie, please, just apologize. For me, please." Junie looked past her manager, toward Elmore, who was staring at her with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. Not pity, not embarrassment, but something like awe. Like he couldn't quite believe a stranger would risk anything for him. She made her decision. I'm not going to apologize for treating a customer with basic human dignity, Junie said, loud enough now that the whole room could hear it clearly. If that costs me my job, then it costs me my job. But I won't stand here and pretend that what happened at that table was acceptable, because it wasn't. Desmond's smile widened into something almost cruel. Then I suppose we have our answer. He turned to Priscilla. Fire her. Tonight. Or my firm pulls every event we've booked here for the next 2 years. That includes the gala next month. I trust you understand the math. Priscilla's face crumbled. Junie watched her manager's hands actually shake as she reached for her radio. But before Priscilla could say another word, a quiet voice cut through the tension. Excuse me. Everyone turned. It was Elmore. He had risen slowly from his chair, using the table for support, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he steadied himself. This young woman, Elmore said, his voice thin but clear, carrying across the silent room, has done nothing but treat me with kindness tonight. Kindness I have not received from anyone else in this building. If she loses her position because of that, then I want it known publicly that it was because she chose decency over cowardice. Desmond scoffed. With respect, old man, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me entirely, Elmore said, his eyes hard now, something flinty and unshaken beneath the gentleness. Because it was my dignity she defended, and I will not sit quietly while she pays the price for it. For a brief, strange moment, something flickered across Desmond's face. Not quite recognition, but something close to it, like a word sitting just at the edge of memory. He studied the old man's face more closely, the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes despite the trembling hands. Then he waved it away, laughing it off. Whatever you say, pal. He turned back to Priscilla. Fire her now. Priscilla's eyes filled with tears of her own helplessness. Junie, I am so sorry. I have no choice. You're going to need to clock out. Junie nodded slowly, her chin trembling but her spine straight. She untied her apron with steady hands, folded it neatly, and set it on the edge of the table. It's okay, she said quietly, though it wasn't, not really. Her mother's medication, the rent due in 9 days, all of it crashed through her mind at once. But she kept her face calm. I'd make the same choice again. She turned to Elmore before she left, her eyes soft, despite everything. It was an honor serving you tonight, sir. I hope the rest of your evening is peaceful. Elmore reached out and gently took her hand in both of his weathered ones. Young lady, he said, his voice thick with something that sounded almost like emotion held tightly in check. You have no idea what you've just done, but you will. I promise you that. Junie offered a small, tired smile, assuming it was simply the kindness of an old man trying to comfort her in her worst moment. She walked out of Le Voisin that night without a job, without a paycheck, and without any idea that the trembling old man she'd defended was about to change absolutely everything, because as she reached the door, Elmore quietly slipped something into her coat pocket, a folded piece of paper, without her noticing. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, her old sedan waiting 3 blocks away in the cheap parking lot, she had no way of knowing that inside that restaurant, Elmore had just placed a single phone call. It's me, he said quietly into his phone, once he was alone by the window. I need you to find someone. Her name is Junie Alvarez, and I need you to find her tonight. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, sharp, commanding, the kind of voice used to giving orders that moved billions of dollars, went suddenly soft. Dad, what happened? Are you all right? I'm fine, Elmore said, watching through the glass as Junie's small figure disappeared into the night. But I just met someone who reminded me exactly who your mother was, and I am not going to let this go unanswered. 3 days passed, and Junie Alvarez had not found a new job. She sat at the small kitchen table of her apartment, a stack of bills spread out in front of her like a losing hand of cards, and did the math over and over again, hoping it would somehow come out different each time. It never did. Her mother, Rosalind, watched from the doorway of her bedroom, leaning on her cane, her face lined with worry. "You'll find something, mija," Rosalind said softly. "You always do." "I know, Mama," Junie said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "I've got 2 interviews lined up this week." That wasn't entirely a lie. She did have interviews. What she didn't mention was that both restaurants had already called back to say the position had been filled. A suspiciously fast turnaround that made her wonder uneasily whether Priscilla had said something to discourage them. Desmond Cole's kind of money had a way of reaching further than people expected. She hadn't told her mother about the restaurant, about Desmond, about any of it. Rosalind's heart wasn't strong, and stress was the one thing her doctor had been most firm about avoiding, so Junie carried it alone, the way she carried most things. That afternoon, needing air more than answers, she walked to Miller's Park, 3 blocks from their apartment, and sat on the same bench she always sat on when the world felt too heavy. Pigeons scattered near the fountain. Kids laughed on the playground. Somewhere a food truck's bell jingled, and there, feeding breadcrumbs to the pigeons with unhurried patience, sat Elmore Whitfield. Junie blinked, certain she was imagining it. But it was him. The same worn coat, the same gentle stoop of his shoulders, the same quiet dignity that had first caught her attention days ago. "Sir?" she said, walking closer. "Is that... it's you, from the restaurant?" Elmore looked up, and his weathered face broke into a warm, genuine smile, the first she'd seen from him, without sadness woven through it. "Junie," he said, "I was hoping I might run into you." "You remember my name?" she said, surprised. "I remember everyone who's shown me kindness," he said simply. "There haven't been so many that I could forget." She sat beside him on the bench, unsure why it felt so natural. "How are you?" "After everything that happened, better than I've been in some time, actually," Elmore said, tossing another handful of crumbs. "And you, I've thought about you every day since." Junie let out a breath, some of the tension in her shoulders easing simply from being asked. "Honestly, not great. I lost my job that night. I've been looking, but nothing's come through yet." Elmore's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something sharp beneath the calm surface. "I'm sorry to hear that. Truly, you shouldn't have paid a price for decency." "I don't regret it," Junie said, and meant it. "I just wish decency paid the electric bill." Elmore chuckled, low and warm. "A fair complaint. The world is upside down that way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the pigeons squabble over crumbs. "Can I ask you something?" Junie said finally. "Of course." "That night, you said something to those men. About your wife, I think. Was it a special day?" Elmore's eyes softened, distant. "Her birthday. She would have been 65. We were married 41 years before I lost her. I go somewhere special every year on that day and order her favorite meal. Foolish, maybe, but it's how I keep her close." "That's not foolish," Junie said gently. "That's beautiful." Elmore looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "You have a rare kindness in you, Junie, the kind that isn't performed for an audience. I noticed it the moment you walked to my table that night." Junie felt her cheeks warm. "I just believe people deserve to be treated with respect. Doesn't seem like it should be rare." "It shouldn't," Elmore agreed. "And yet..." They began meeting most afternoons after that, not by grand plan, but by a quiet, unspoken agreement that neither wanted to name too directly. Junie would come to the park after her interviews, and more often than not, Elmore would already be there, feeding the pigeons, waiting. She told him about her mother's illness, the slow drain of medical bills that never seemed to stop climbing. He listened without judgment, without pity, simply listened, the way so few people ever truly did. He told her about Corinne, about the small grocery store they'd run together decades ago, long since sold. About watching a daughter grow up too fast, too far away now, buried in a world of work that left little room for simple afternoons like this one. "Do you have children?" Junie asked one afternoon, curious despite herself. Something flickered across Elmore's face, pride and something more complicated beneath it. A daughter. Brilliant woman. Works entirely too much, if you ask me. "Are you close?" "We used to be," Elmore said quietly. "These last few years have been harder. Grief does strange things to a family. She buried herself in work after her mother passed. I understand it. Doesn't mean it doesn't ache." Junie reached over and gently squeezed his weathered hand, an instinct more than a decision. "I'm sure she loves you. Sometimes people just don't know how to carry grief out loud." Elmore looked down at her hand on his, and for a moment his eyes glistened. "You remind me of her mother, you know. Corinne had that same gift, seeing straight through to what mattered when everyone else got lost in the noise. It was, Junie would later realize, the highest compliment he could have given her. What Junie didn't know, what she had no possible way of knowing, was that every afternoon she spent on that park bench was being quietly observed. A dark sedan sat parked half a block away, its windows tinted, its driver watching through the reflection of a phone screen angled just so. Inside, a woman in her early 50s, sharp-eyed and elegantly dressed, studied the footage with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Her name was Adeline Whitfield Cross, and she was the CEO of Cross Capital Holdings, one of the largest private investment firms in North America, a name whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of respect and fear. Forbes had once called her the most dangerous mind in finance. Her net worth, as of the last quarterly filing, sat comfortably above $4 billion. She was also, though almost no one in the business world knew it, Elmore Whitfield's only daughter. "He's been coming here every day for a week," said Reginald, her head of security, sitting beside her in the back seat. "Same bench, same time. Should I approach the girl? Run a full background check?" "No," Adeline said quietly, still watching her father laugh at something the young woman had said, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't heard from him in 3 years. "Not yet. Let it happen naturally. He hasn't smiled like that since Mom died. And the men from the restaurant, the Desmond Cole situation?" Adeline's expression shifted, cold and precise, the softness gone in an instant. "Pull everything. His firm's contracts, his personal finances, every deal his company has touched in the last 5 years. I want to know exactly how deep his arrogance goes before I decide how far to bury him." Reginald nodded and began typing. "And the girl," Adeline added, her voice softening again as she watched Junie help her father up from the bench, offering her arm without being asked. "Junie Alvarez. Find out everything. Gently. I want to understand who she really is before I ever let her know who we are." She watched a moment longer as her father and the young waitress walked slowly toward the park's edge, deep in easy conversation, an unlikely friendship blooming in the most ordinary of places. "He told me on the phone that she reminded him of Mom," Adeline said quietly, almost to herself. "I need to see that for myself." What Adeline didn't yet know, what none of them could have predicted, was that Desmond Cole's firm was, at that very moment, in the final stages of negotiating a multi-million-dollar acquisition deal with Cross Capital Holdings, her firm, and the storm that was about to break over his head would be unlike anything Desmond Cole had ever imagined possible. 2 weeks passed, and the afternoons in Miller's Park had become the steadiest thing in Junie's life. She still hadn't found permanent work. A handful of shifts at a diner near the highway kept the lights on, barely, but nothing close to what she needed. Still, every day around 3 o'clock, she found herself walking toward the park, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "You look tired," Elmore said one afternoon, studying her face as she sat down beside him. "Double shift at the diner," Junie admitted. "Then I had an interview this morning that went nowhere. The manager took one look at my references and got very quiet." Elmore's brow furrowed. "Quiet how?" "Like someone had already told him not to hire me," Junie said, trying to laugh it off, though the exhaustion in her voice betrayed her. "I know that sounds paranoid." It didn't sound paranoid to Elmore. It sounded exactly like something Desmond Cole would do, the kind of quiet, petty cruelty that powerful men used when they wanted someone punished without ever having to say why. "You let me worry about that," Elmore said, his voice carrying an edge Junie hadn't heard from him before. "What do you mean?" "Nothing," he said, softening. "Just an old man's grumbling. Tell me about your mother instead." "How is she today?" Junie let the subject drop, too tired to press, and told him about Rosalind's good morning, how she'd made her favorite arroz con leche despite her hands aching from the effort. Elmore listened the way he always did, fully, warmly, as though nothing in the world mattered more than what she was saying. It was, Junie had realized somewhere in the last 2 weeks, the first real friendship she'd had in longer than she could remember. Between work and her mother's care, there had never been room for much else. Elmore had slipped into that empty space so naturally it almost frightened her, how much she'd come to look forward to seeing him. Across town, in a glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of the Cole Capitol building, Desmond Cole sat with his feet up on his desk, laughing into his phone. "No, I'm serious, Whit. You should have seen her face when Priscilla finally caved, fired on the spot. All because she wanted to play hero for some homeless guy." He laughed again, sharp and satisfied. "Some people never learn their place." He hung up just as his assistant knocked, poking her head in. "Mr. Cole, your 2 o'clock is here, the cross-capital team for the acquisition review." Desmond straightened his tie, grinning. "Send them in. This is the deal that makes my year." He had spent 8 months chasing this acquisition. Cross Capital's backing would triple his firm's assets under management overnight, catapult him into a different tier of the industry entirely. He'd told his partners it was practically signed. He'd told his wife they might finally buy that house in the Hamptons. He had no idea that the woman about to sit across from him already knew everything about the night at Le Voisin. 3 sharply dressed associates entered first, followed by Adeline Whitfield Cross herself, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked simple until you noticed the tailoring, the kind of understated wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Desmond rose, beaming, extending his hand. "Ms. Whitfield Cross, it's an honor. We've been looking forward to this for months." Adeline shook his hand, her grip firm, her smile polite and utterly unreadable. "Mr. Cole, let's get started, shall we?" For the next 40 minutes, the meeting proceeded exactly as Desmond had hoped. Numbers reviewed, projections praised, his associates nodding eagerly at every point Adeline's team raised. He felt the deal solidifying with every passing minute, felt the future he'd promised himself finally within reach. Then, near the end, Adeline set down her pen. "Before we finalize anything, Mr. Cole, I'd like to ask you something unrelated to the numbers," she said, her voice pleasant, conversational. "Of course, anything," Desmond said, leaning back confident. "Do you frequent Le Voisin? The restaurant downtown?" Desmond blinked, caught slightly off guard by the shift. "I do, actually. Great spot. You should join me sometime if you're ever—" "I hear there was an incident there a few weeks ago," Adeline continued, her tone unchanged, still perfectly pleasant. A young waitress lost her job. Something about defending an elderly man from mockery at a table of finance executives. The room went very still. Desmond's smile faltered, just slightly, though he recovered quickly. "I'm not sure I know what you're referring to." "No?" Adeline tilted her head. "That's strange. My sources were quite thorough. They mentioned an old man, dismissed and humiliated by a group of men celebrating a deal closing, mocked for his appearance, told he didn't belong. And when a waitress objected, she was fired at that same table's insistence." Desmond's associates exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Whit Hargrove, who had been at the dinner, suddenly found something fascinating to examine on his phone. "Ms. Whitfield Cross?" Desmond said carefully. "I'm not sure what this has to do with our acquisition discussion." "It has everything to do with it," Adeline said, her voice dropping into something colder, something that made the temperature in the room feel like it had dropped 10 degrees. "Because Cross Capital does not partner with firms whose leadership treats vulnerable people with cruelty. That's not a policy on paper, Mr. Cole. It's a line I do not cross, ever." "With respect," Desmond said, a note of panic creeping beneath his composure, "this sounds like it's been blown wildly out of proportion. It was one dinner, a misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you threatened to pull business from the restaurant unless a young woman was fired for showing kindness to an elderly stranger?" Adeline asked, her eyes locked on his. "Because that's not how misunderstandings typically work, in my experience." Desmond opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer that wouldn't incriminate him further. Adeline rose from her chair, smoothing her jacket, her associates following her lead in perfect practice silence. "I think we're finished here," she said. "I'll have my team draft a formal statement declining to move forward with the acquisition. I'd suggest you use the time you would have spent celebrating this deal to reflect on the kind of leader you want to be, Mr. Cole. The market has a long memory for men who mistake cruelty for power." She turned to leave, then paused at the door, glancing back with something almost gentle in her expression, almost but not quite. "For what it's worth," she added, "the old man you humiliated that night deserved better. Far better than what you gave him." She walked out, leaving Desmond Cole standing frozen in the middle of his own office, the deal of his career unraveling in real time, and absolutely no understanding yet of how deep or how personal this defeat was about to become. That evening, back at Miller's Park, Elmore sat waiting on their usual bench, watching the sun sink low and gold behind the city skyline. When Junie arrived, he could tell immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, rising slightly as she sat down heavily beside him. "The diner let me go," Junie said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Said they're cutting hours. But the manager wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it." She let out a bitter laugh. "I'm starting to think someone really doesn't want me employed anywhere in this city." Elmore's hands tightened into fists at his sides, hidden beneath the sleeves of his worn coat. "Junie," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to trust that I have a good reason for asking." "Okay," she said, wary but curious. "If you were offered a position, a real position, good pay, stable, would you take it, even if it came from somewhere unexpected?" Junie studied his face, confused. "Elmore, what are you talking about?" He opened his mouth to answer, and that was the exact moment his phone rang. A phone Junie had never actually seen him use before, sleek and expensive in a way that didn't match anything else about him. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted instantly, all warmth draining into something sharp and alert. "I have to take this," he said quickly, standing and walking a few steps away. Junie watched him go, her mind spinning, unable to shake the strange details piling up around this gentle old man, the expensive phone, the sedan she sometimes noticed parked nearby, the way he spoke sometimes with an authority that didn't match a man who fed pigeons for company. She strained to hear his voice, low and urgent, carried faintly on the evening breeze. "I don't care what it costs the firm. Cancel the deal entirely. No, I want it public. She's been through enough already, and I will not have that man's arrogance cost her anything further." Junie's breath caught in her throat. The firm. Cancel the deal. Public. Who exactly was Elmore Whitfield? The revelation, justice, and a happy ending. Elmore ended the call and turned back toward the bench, his expression carefully smoothed back into gentleness. But it was too late. Junie was already standing, her arms crossed, her eyes searching his face with a mixture of confusion and something close to hurt. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. "Junie. Cancel the deal? Public? Elmore, what firm? What are you talking about?" He sighed, a long, heavy exhale, as though setting down a weight he'd carried carefully for weeks. "Sit with me, please. I owe you the truth, and you deserve to hear all of it." She sat slowly, wary but willing. "My full name is Elmore Whitfield," he began. "Years ago, my wife and I ran a small grocery store. We built it from nothing. And when Corinne got sick, I sold everything I had to pay for her care, sold the store, the house, nearly everything. I couldn't save her. But in the process, an old investment I'd made decades earlier, almost as a joke, quietly grew into something enormous. By the time she passed, I found myself sitting on more money than I ever imagined possible, and none of it could buy back a single day with her." Junie stared at him, speechless. "I stopped caring about appearances after that," Elmore continued. "The suits, the watches, all of it felt hollow. I started dressing simply, living simply. It made the world treat me honestly, because people show you exactly who they are when they think you have nothing to offer them." His eyes met hers, warm and a little sad. "You showed me who you were, Junie, without knowing anything about me at all." "The dinner," Junie whispered. "That's why they treated you that way." "That's why," Elmore confirmed. "And it's why I couldn't let it go unanswered." "And the firm you mentioned, the deal." Elmore hesitated only a moment. "My daughter runs one of the largest investment firms in the country, Adeline Whitfield Cross. You may have heard the name." Junie's face went pale. Everyone had heard that name. "She was in the process of finalizing a major acquisition with Desmond Cole's company," Elmore said. "I asked her to walk away from it publicly, because I will not stand by while a man who mocked an old stranger and cost a good woman her job continues to profit without consequence." Junie sat in stunned silence, trying to reassemble everything she thought she'd understood about the gentle, quiet man beside her. "You could have told me," she finally said, though there was no anger in it, only overwhelm. "I know," Elmore said softly, "and I'm sorry for the deception. But I needed to know, truly know, that you cared about an old man because he was a person worth caring about, not because of what he might be able to give you. You have no idea how rare that has become in my life." Junie's eyes filled unexpectedly with tears. "I would have cared about you either way, Elmore, rich or poor. That was never the point." "I know that now," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "which is exactly why I trust you completely with what I'm about to ask." 3 days later, the story broke across every major financial news outlet. Cross Capital Holdings terminates Cole Capital acquisition amid misconduct allegations. The article detailed in careful but unmistakable language the incident at Le Voisin, the mockery of an elderly patron, the wrongful termination of a young waitress who had defended him, and Cross Capital's public refusal to associate with leadership that treated vulnerable people with cruelty. Desmond Cole's phone did not stop ringing for 3 straight days. Clients pulled contracts. His partners, terrified of the reputational fallout, forced an emergency board meeting. By the end of the week, Desmond Cole was no longer CEO of the firm that bore his name. Whit Hargrove and Brantley Voss fared little better. Their names quietly circulated in finance circles as the men who'd laughed along that night, their own reputations tarnished by association. Neither would find it easy, in the months ahead, to get another firm to return their calls. Priscilla Danes, to her credit, wrote Junie a long, tearful letter of apology, explaining the impossible position she'd been placed in and offering, hopelessly, desperately, to give her old job back. Junie thanked her kindly and declined, because by then Junie had received a very different offer entirely. "I don't understand," Junie said, sitting across from Adeline Whitfield Cross in a conference room so elegant it made her want to apologize for existing in it. Elmore sat quietly beside his daughter, watching with quiet pride. "Why would you offer me this? I have no experience in finance. None." "You have something rarer than experience," Adeline said, sliding a folder across the polished table. "You have integrity that doesn't bend under pressure. I've built an entire company trying to find people like that, and most of them are impossible to spot until they're tested. You were tested publicly at great personal cost, and you didn't flinch." The folder contained an offer letter, Director of Community Impact Initiatives, Cross Capital Holdings, a salary that made Junie's hands tremble as she read it, full benefits, and a mandate to design programs supporting service workers exactly like the one she used to be. "I want you helping build something that protects people like you were that night," Adeline said. "People who do the right thing and pay for it anyway. That shouldn't happen. Not on my watch, not anymore." Junie looked up, overwhelmed, tears slipping down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. This is more than I ever—" "You don't have to decide today," Elmore said gently, reaching over to squeeze her hand, the same way she had once squeezed his on a park bench in the middle of an ordinary, extraordinary afternoon. "But I hope you'll say yes, not because of who I am, because of who you are." Junie laughed through her tears. "You already know my answer." 6 months later, Junie stood in the sunlit lobby of Cross Capital's headquarters, no longer the wide-eyed new hire, but a director whose programs, worker protection funds, anonymous reporting systems for wrongful termination, emergency assistance grants for service industry employees, were already being studied by companies across the country. Her mother's medical bills were fully covered now, her care upgraded to a specialist who'd finally stabilized her heart condition. Rosalind, healthier than she'd been in years, had taken to visiting the office lobby some afternoons, proudly telling anyone who'd listen that her daughter worked there. And every Sunday, without fail, Junie had dinner with Elmore, sometimes at his modest apartment, sometimes with Adeline joining them, the three of them slowly stitching together a family shaped by loss and softened by unexpected kindness. On the anniversary of Corinne's birthday, they returned to Le Voisin together. Under new ownership now, the old management long gone. This time, they were seated at the best table in the house by the window, candlelight flickering warm across white tablecloths. "To Corinne," Elmore said, raising his glass of red wine, the same drink he ordered every year. "To Corinne," Junie and Adeline echoed. "And to kindness," Elmore added, looking at Junie with eyes full of quiet, grateful love, the love of a man who had lost one daughter's easy warmth to grief and work, and found, in the unlikeliest of places, a kind of daughter's love returned to him again. That still finds its way even in a world that so often forgets to look for it. Junie smiled, thinking back to that first night. The water glass she'd refilled without being asked, the apron she'd folded and set down without regret, the terrifying leap of standing up for a stranger simply because it was right. She hadn't known then that kindness could change a life so completely. She knew it now. And somewhere outside the restaurant window, the city moved on exactly as it always had, full of hurried people, loud laughter, careless cruelty, and quiet, unnoticed acts of grace, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to choose them. The end.